Gavin, thank you ever so much for joining me on the International Classroom podcast. Whereabouts in the world do we find you today?
So I'm in Singapore today. I have lived in Singapore for 8 years now and absolutely love it here. It's a great country to be.
Fantastic. And there's going to be some educators out there that maybe haven't come across the work that you're doing. So how would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, I'm Gavin. I was born in London and I grew up in London. And then when I was 21, I met a lovely young lady called Kate, who was Australian. And we met in London, fell in love. And then I moved to Australia when I was 23. We got married and I lived in Adelaide, South Australia for 13 years. And worked at an independent school there and through all levels of school, up to being the principal of the secondary school and deputy head of schools over all of the campuses. And then we decided to move to Singapore with our 3 children back in 2017. And it's one of the best decisions we've ever made.
Amazing. So what is it that drew you to Singapore in the first place?
Well, when we got married, we said, well, we'll give Adelaide 2 years. And after that, we'll go and travel somewhere because I was a teacher, my wife's a chef, so traveling was easy. But 13 years and 3 children later, we were still in Adelaide. And so we decided, well, it's now or never really. Our kids were 8, 7 and 4. And we talked for a while about traveling overseas and doing an international teaching gig. And so basically, I just started applying to various international roles all throughout Asia. That's really where we saw ourselves as being. And I was really, really fortunate to find my current school, ACS International, which is a wonderful school based here in Singapore. And I started there as the vice principal of the school. And after 4 years, became the principal of the school back in 2021, just in the middle of COVID. And it's been just a tremendous honor to be able to lead that school community.
Amazing. Well, first, many congratulations with obviously a few years ago, but still. I'm just curious with this then, how does obviously this international school, because it's obviously from Singapore, it's a real hub for expats, so the diversity of the students you have in there will be vast. How does that compare to the experience that you had in Australia?
Sure. Well, where I was teaching in Australia was in the northern suburbs of Adelaide. And like the vast majority of our students were Australians, we did start to see more students coming in from places like Myanmar and Southeast Asia, but it was a very, very small minority at that time. But I have to say our school was really big on inclusion. And so we had a number of opportunities for Sudanese refugees to come to our school. And that was a real privilege to see those students come in and get a great education. And with a real commitment to SEN and students who had sort of problematic backgrounds had ended up in the care of the guardian and the minister coming to our school as well. So that was the experience which I had in Australia. And then moving to Singapore, our school is very, very different to that experience which I had. In fact, we're one of the few international schools. In fact, there's only 3 schools in Singapore which can take or enroll both international students and Singaporean students. Singaporean students cannot go to international schools in Singapore. They have to go to the Ministry of Education schools, with the exception of 3 schools, and we're one of those 3 schools on the island.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's amazing. I'm really curious then. It's like, why is that then?
Sure. So Singapore back in 2000 felt that it would be a good idea to have international students come to Singapore and to mix with Singaporeans. And for Singaporeans to mix with international students rather than them all being totally separate. And so 2 schools were started, our school, ACS International, and another international school, with the agreement that 50% of the enrollment would be Singaporeans and 50% would be non-Singaporeans. Then later on, a 3rd school came on under that same arrangement. And it's just been fantastic to have a school where we can mix together the local culture, which is, of course, dominant, It's what we all experience every day in our daily lives, walking around, interacting with people. So having that side of the school, but then also bringing in the myriad of diversity, nations, nationalities, cultures, languages that everyone else speaks who comes to our school. So we attract a lot of students from the Asian region, and so a lot from Southeast Asia, China, South Korea, Japan, India. And then we have a large number of students who have an Asian heritage, but they carry a UK, US, Australian, New Zealand passport. So yeah, it's really cool.
So for ACS, what is the curriculum that your school majority follows?
Yeah, so we're a Cambridge IGCSE school, and then all students and then progress on to do the International Baccalaureate Diploma Program. So that's all we do. We don't do the Singapore A-level or O-level system. We don't do British A-levels or Australian curriculum. We just do IGCSE followed by the IB.
Okay. So even though you've got a cohort, let's say a 50% intake of Singaporeans, they're also then allowed to study the IGCSE and the IB.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Amazing. So you've obviously been there for a long time and you're getting best of both worlds in this sense, in terms of having this influx of locals, whilst also having the international students there.
Yeah.
Now, Singapore, I think, is also viewed in some ways having this fantastic education system. And you've obviously been immersed in that now for since 2017, I think you said.
Yeah.
What do you think sets the Singaporean education system apart from others around the world?
Sure. To answer that question, you have to have some understanding of Singapore as a nation and its history. So most people know Singapore is a very small country. It's just an island found at the bottom of the Malaysian peninsula. It became a country about 58 years ago. And when it was created, the founding fathers, and in particular, the first Prime Minister, Lee Kuan Yew, recognized that Singapore, it really has no natural resources. It's so small. It doesn't have anything like what the majority of other countries have. They have some kind of natural resource. And so it identified really that its people were its natural resource, and that the investment for Singapore to be successful needs to be in its population. And so over the years, Singapore, as we know, has come to become a global city, a hub of international business, and of course, very good in education as well, because it really does invest in education, in its students and in its nation, and sees that really as nation building, investing in people. And so to come into that and see that in the nation's culture, it is quite unique, really, because when it's exam time in Singapore, for example, the whole nation knows about it. It's a tiny place with 5.5 million people living in it. And yet everybody knows the importance of students doing really, really well. So, for example, this week and in the coming weeks, when we've got our IGCSE and IB exams, our parents of our school put on study sessions for our students where they feed them in our library. It's amazing. Students come in, they study in the library, the parents organize it. They feed them, they cook food, they give it to them. They really support them. If you catch a train anywhere, the signs in the train station saying, if you are late for an exam, here is the closest exam center that you can go to at this station so that you don't miss it, so that you're not negatively impacted by the public transport system. Like, it really is ingrained in the nation's culture to be aspirational for their future. And the way that you do that is through getting a good, sound education.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's something ingrained, like you said, into the culture. Do you think there are any other core values that really drive the success of the education system?
I think when I look at how Singapore has developed its teachers, there really is significant input into their profession and their development. So teachers, for example, when I was in Australia, it would not be uncommon for us to sort of maybe have some staff shortages, or we've got to place teachers sort of slightly out of position. You're a science teacher, but we'll put you in to teach maths as well because, you could probably do it. That really doesn't happen in Singapore at all. you have to be able to teach in the classroom, you have to have a degree in that subject. You get a certificate from the Ministry of Education that tells you the subjects you're allowed to teach and the levels at which you're allowed to teach it to. So it'll state to IGCSE or O levels in Singapore's case, or to IB level. And they study your degree. They study the university that you went to see if it's a university of note. And then they issue the certificate. So all of our teachers are teaching in areas where they really are specialists. And going beyond that, I think Singapore has a really great program of developing its teachers and its leaders in higher education as well. So investing in scholarships, both to students or teachers who are in Singapore, to send them to Singapore universities, but also overseas as well, to send them to top UK, US universities, other Asian universities that are renowned in a particular subject. And then those people come back with those ideas and that learning, and they have something which is called a bond. So if you accept that scholarship, you then become bonded, which means you have to come back and do like a minimum tenure, so that investment has some kind of payoff in the local system. But you see people who really do see themselves as being developed, people being interested in being developed, and that knowledge and skill and experience coming out in the school leadership, in the school practices, which I think ultimately improves the classroom pedagogy, the structure of the school, and what's valued within our school communities.
So do you get support from the Ministry of Education in Singapore for the type of PD that you deliver, or does it give you a sort of a guidance on what you should be doing or have to be doing over the course of a year?
So for my school, because we're categorized as a privately funded school, we don't have access to the sorts of initiatives that we would find in the Ministry of Education system. However, because it is essentially the culture here, the expectation, of course, we look to mirror that, as many of the international schools here do as well. And so the idea of supporting people financially through their higher education studies, allowing them to take some time off when it's time for a big assessment, or if there's an exam, which is not all that common, to be honest, but it does happen. We see that as sort of being an investment in our staff, our people, our organisation, and ultimately looking a bit beyond that into the wider educational body, which, I think we all have to contribute to.
Yeah, definitely. And that's, as I say, part of the podcasting in terms of sharing knowledge and values and allowing other people to get access to, people that you wouldn't always necessarily talk to, or you bump into. Yeah. The chance of me bumping into you on the street and having a conversation is probably slim to none. But to be able to do this, like you say, adding value is a really, really important part.
Yeah.
I'm interested then in terms of the school and your experience now, talking about the international baccalaureate, because a lot of educators, when they do move out internationally, whether it's Singapore, Japan, even into the UAE or further afield, wherever it may be in the world, the IB community and the IB examinations is, for one, often lauded over, and I think especially at the diploma program. Like someone who's been involved in it for such a long period of time, like what do you see as the main strengths of the IB program, especially in preparing students for what is then a globalized world?
Absolutely. I think that to get the value out of the IB, you can't be sort of bogged down in the details of what's happening in the exams or the curriculum. Now, I know that sounds like a funny thing to say, but the value of the IB really is through its driving statements and its mission statement. That is to create inquiring young people, people who are knowledgeable, they're caring. And ultimately, we want students who are like that, young people who are going to grow up and be able to create a more peaceful world through education, through their intercultural understanding and their respect. Like if that's what we keep in our mind when we're actually approaching the PYP, MYP, DP, CP, whatever it might be, that is the most critical part of it. We can often, and I'm guilty of this as well, just think about it as being, it's all about preparing them for the exam at the end. If that's our only approach, we're definitely missing out and we're doing people a disservice, because we're looking to create generations of young people who are going to head out into the world and face those challenging problems. I've heard the term VUCA. I don't know if you've heard of that, VUCA. VUCA world, a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. And if we look around, you can see the world is volatile. It's uncertain about, what the world will look like in a year's time, 5 years' time, 10 years' time. It's complex. The world is so interconnected now. And how do you respond to that? Well, one response is to be comfortable with that complexity and have the ability to deal with it, or you don't want to do it. And so you withdraw and you try and reduce interconnectedness and a globalized world. And we see countries and governments, perhaps in certain groups of people, looking to do that. But the reality is we are highly connected as a world, as people. People have moved out all across the world. I mean, just in Singapore, the amazing people that you meet here from everywhere, and I'm sure it's the same throughout the world, in the Middle East and in other places as well. We need people who are able to have that knowledge of themselves, what their own cultural makeup is, how that has shaped themselves as a person and their thinking, but also be able to, when they're speaking to other people, see it in other people and understand that their perspectives have been formed by the world that they grew up in, the world that they've experienced. And so they might come to the table with different issues. And for an IB student, I would hope that they would, and through the course of doing IB, have that knowledge, skills, and attitude where they can identify all of those things and be able to speak intelligently into the world's problems. That's what I hope the IB offers.
Definitely. From experiencing myself, there are parts of it. It's the same with any educational curriculum. There's parts of it I really like, and there's parts of it I don't. And I'm a weird one because whenever I speak with people about the IB, I love the MYP.
Yeah.
And I really love working through that. And I preferred it to the DP. And people who have taught it for a while just look at me like there's a hole in my head. It's like, how can you? But it's like, I really just enjoyed the level of creativity. Yeah. Especially for someone like myself who enjoys creating curriculum and the interdisciplinary component. Whereas as a biologist teaching the diploma program, it's like, here's a really good website. It's got everything you need on it. You don't really need me. Like there's guys out there who've produced some amazing content. But actually the flip side of that is, hey, there's a really good website out there, guys. You don't need me to learn the content. Where we can bring this in is how we look about, obviously, the pillars and the characteristics of how do we make you these types of individuals. So some fantastic practitioners out there about it.
My daughter, she just did the PYP last year, and she did her exhibition. And I went along, and the work that she did was phenomenal. She'd done a whole investigation about prosthetic limbs. She'd done the history of why people need prostheses on their legs, on their arms. She'd learned about conflicts around the world. She'd learnt about the science of the construction of limbs. She'd learnt about how they are sort of constructed, how they are fitted to people, how people adapt to them. And actually, I happened to have a visit over to Vietnam, and I was in Hanoi. And there's a whole museum there about prosthetics. And I took some photographs of it. And we had this just amazingly rich conversation about it, which all came through the PYP and that interdisciplinary learning, which is hard to find, in other places. It was just great. But yes, I know when you get to the DP and it's kind of the big high stakes exam at the end, university entrance, all that sort of stuff, it does change the dynamic. But I think that's where we as leaders have to be always pulling us back to, well, why are we doing this? What's the overarching reason for all of it?
Yeah, I spoke very unfortunate within this mini-series that we're doing about global perspectives in education. And I've recently been speaking with educators and professors in Finland. And they were talking, obviously, the big emphasis they have and how Finland within the last couple of years have shifted their whole curriculum focus on problem-based learning and this phenomenon-based learning they do. But these guys were also talking a lot about the design-based learning, the interdisciplinary components. It was interesting what you said from the IB side of things in the issues we face, the VUCA side of things. They talked a lot in the design think about wicked problems, things that, around the corner that we can't see. And there seems to be some similarities really in terms of the IB aspiration with obviously how the Finnish approach to things as well. And again, going back to this like concept of interdisciplinary. But do you find then, just from thinking as a global leader now, do you find then that the IGCSE prepares students for then the diploma program?
So I know there's a lot of debate about this. We do the IGCSE program. We believe, of course, it does have value, and there are some subjects in there like global perspectives, which are amazing. They are great. But there is a gap that our students face from when they finish the IGCSEs to when they do the IB diploma program. We have top students at our school. Literally, students at our school get top in the world results, which is the highest grade you can get in the world for a student. We have multiple of those every year. We have students who get straight A stars, straight A's, et cetera, and they start to do the IB diploma, and there is an adjustment period that can be 6 to 8 months where these students who have been successful for years and years in the classroom suddenly find it difficult to grasp what they're supposed to do. And part of that is the IGCSE and the way that its philosophy impacts what happens in the classroom, and then how that translates into the IB philosophy of being inquiry, the learner profile, students discovering themselves, discovering issues for themselves, and synthesizing knowledge together and constructing new knowledge, and then being able to convey that knowledge in a convincing and valid way. All of those sorts of skills, sometimes students can struggle with. And in the context of Singapore, it's magnified as well, because as many people will know, that tutoring is quite a big culture in Singapore as well. So students go to school and they have their 8 till 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock schooling. They will then go and do several hours of tuition after school, where it's a lot and the tutor student ratio is a lot lower, sometimes 1-to-1, sometimes 1-to-3, something like that. And they are really led through at quite an intense level about how to solve these problems. But when you get to the IB, you can't just say, here's the notes, here's the cheat sheets, go and just sort of drill and kill and learn all of this. It doesn't work like that. And so, we have families who say, well, look, my student's always been successful, but they're struggling. What tutor do you recommend? How can we get a tutor to help solve this problem? But it's not as easy as that, because you can't just get a tutor to sit them down for 4 hours each night and tell them, right, this is how you be creative. This is how you analyze information. This is how you create your own thoughts. So there can be a gap there, which takes some time to fill, even for our strongest students.
Yeah, it's weird. I take the best parts from my experience of the DP and even just try and integrate it into my normal teaching at IGCSE and so forth. And even this week with the lower school, the year 7s and 8s, it's like, how do you teach resilience? And even that, you can't teach it. It's how do you develop resilience in students? And it's telling them, it's saying to them and giving them a test of something, or giving them, practice questions that are hard questions, and talking about thinking hard and and the other part, again, from the Finnish, is self-regulation. They talk a lot about self-regulation and staying, within the task. And it's so interesting if you just sit back, and I found this is like, right, here you go, guys. This is my reasoning. We are practicing. It's not a test. It's part of your learning process is to practice, and then let them go. It's fascinating to watch how long students stay with the problem and stay with it versus those who kind of go, this is too hard, and switch off. Because I think in their minds, sometimes it's a case of, well, if it's difficult, that's wrong. Learning should be easy. And I think that's a global issue that we have in terms of sometimes the students think, wow, this is too hard. I don't want to stick with it. That idea of stickability, or developing the type of learning characteristics we want in them to be successful. But like you say, you have to put them into situations to develop those skills. And when you're transitioning from a very, very successful 16-year-old who might have got 8 9s, 9 9s, to come into then, something that has, here's a statement of inquiry that's got a completely no question to it. It is literally a statement. Here's the big idea. And someone goes, right, guys, how do you unpack this? It's a challenge for them. It really is. But actually, I would say it's a worthwhile challenge for them, because I'm sure like you say, that by the time they overcome that 8-month period, and then they've got another 9 or so months to their exams, I'm sure by the end of it, they're a much more well-rounded learner and individual, aren't they?
Yeah, well, I think that's why it's really important as schools, we're very clear on what our intention is when we develop our students. So having your purpose really clearly stated. So in our purpose, we talk about being international minded, having a deep compassion for humanity, and having those overarching statements which are found in classrooms all the way through the school. It helps to explain to students why in IGCSE, we're not just doing the IGCSE curriculum. We're doing other things as well, which will help you later on as you do IB. But we do them here because this is what we would say, this is what an ACS student's learner profile is. And these are the important qualities and traits. And so one of our traits is tenacity. So how are we going to develop tenacity? Well, we can do it through academics, maybe. We can do it through our co-curricular activities. We can do it through our house system, through service activities. Like the breadth of everything that we do in the school is more than just how you're going to do in your IGCSE exam. And as you transition into IB and you start bringing in the IB learner profile, well, it's not completely fresh and new because as a school, we've been talking to you about these values and traits for a very long time. And hopefully you've experienced them and developed them. So that's one way in which I think it's important schools can do to try and bridge that gap.
Yeah, and you start to see a lot more schools who aren't on the IB who are bringing in like learner profiles, learner characteristics, or the 6 Cs of sorts. So really kind of taking on board IB and other global areas of what they've brought in with that. Just want to sort of shift focus a little bit with this, but still maintain. But you mentioned earlier regarding obviously parents coming in and contributing to the school. And obviously what you've mentioned as we've talked through this is the importance of how teachers kind of emphasize and probably model these characteristics and remind students about these characteristics. And in Singapore, there's kind of this emphasis maybe within the Singaporean curriculum as it's more, I want to see if it transitions over to you guys, about the student-teacher relationship. And I'm curious, in terms of that dynamic, how do you find that dynamic contributing to the success of that education system and also transitioning into the international education system?
Sure. Well, we tell our teachers connection before content. Yeah, the starting point in the classroom is making that connection with the student. Spend some time at the start, developing relationships, get to know them. The temptation is just to launch into the curriculum, but no, it has to be connection before content. And I think that we do a good job of that. I think that in Singapore, my experience has certainly been that parents see the teachers as the experts. They see the school as being a partner with them. And I haven't always experienced that in the schools that I have worked in, but it certainly is true here. If I could grab all of my school's parents and take them to my next school, that would be wonderful because they really do see us as partners and they respect our work. And I have never been in a school like ours where the parents are so supportive. They run so many of our events. I mean, I mentioned the study nights. They come in, we have a back to school party, which they run. You ought to see our international day. It's just full of parents having cooked, dressed up, putting on games. It's phenomenal. And so I think that positive relationship that we have with them, it just makes such a difference. And not just when things are going well, but when there's things that don't go well, when there's problems, when there's issues, having that connection to parents is really important. And I think that our teachers as well, they put in so much time after school with students. They do supports lessons with them. They do all this stuff in Google Classroom. And part of my job as the principal is to manage that because it is possible for that to be too much and the boundaries to be crossed about what's expected, sort of teachers being available all the time. And I know it's a big issue at the moment, particularly in Europe, but in other places as well, in Australia as well. This idea about the right to disconnect is really important and allowing people to have the time away from work so that they're fresh and in a good frame of mind when they do come. So it's a delicate balance, and something that we always work on. But for me as a principal, investing in making sure that those relationships are positive, I think is one of the most important things that me and my team do.
Amazing. Yeah, because what you've got there in Singapore and everything, is you've got a very competitive academic environment. I mean, in terms of high expectations, and we kind of established that it's great that there's a support network like we see around the country, but that's a spotlight. It's added pressure in terms of very competitive nature. So
Yes.
within that sense, what type of strategies do you use for your teachers to maintain strong teacher-student connections and develop those kind of characteristics whilst you've got parents and maybe students who are just striving for academic greatness? For those of us out there who are striving for that, who want to get that, what are the types of things that you are doing, and how are you empowering then sort of your teachers to kind of find that balance?
Yeah. So I think there's a few things that we do. I think it's really important to set clear expectations for all of the community about what's okay, what's not okay. So it would not be uncommon in Singapore for teachers to hand out their personal mobile numbers to parents and students. Now, that is something that just wouldn't happen in many, many countries. And I'm not sure it's an overly healthy thing to be happening either. And just recently, actually, I think the Singapore government, Ministry of Education, has tried to be sort of pulling back from that. And certainly at our school, we definitely don't encourage teachers to do that. I think that they can feel at times a cultural pressure to do that because it does happen in other schools. But for us to say as a leadership, do not do that. We do not expect you to do that. And if you get any adverse reaction to that from parents, we will back you up. And we will tell those parents, we don't do that. That's just not what you're going to get from our school. And so that's one thing. I think setting expectations around what we offer as a school. I've had parents coming in with expectations which are incredibly high, and with no disrespect for my school, because my school's amazing, we can't meet their expectations. It's just what they want, we're not prepared to offer to them. And so, I've met with parents and I've told them flat, we can't offer what you want. If that's your expectation, go somewhere else, because we can't meet that. And I'm not going to attempt to meet it. And there have been times when they do, they leave. And do you know what? That's actually best for everyone. It's best for the child, it's best for the parent, and it's best for us as well. So being able to set clear expectations and holding them is important. Where you can find opportunities to reduce teacher workload as well is important. So our teachers spend a lot of time writing testimonials for students who leave our school. And so sort of embracing AI to be able to help with that is not something that we would shy away from, but something which we say, if you can use that tool and it saves time and it's basically the same, it's not detrimental, then you should do that. When we have students who come around, and students, they love padding their portfolios for university entrance, that sort of thing. We get so many requests. Our teachers get so many requests from our students. Can you write me a letter of reference for my application? It's not necessary. The universities don't ask for it. Probably nobody ever reads it, but to be able to say to teachers, you don't have to do it. You can say no. We expect you to say no. You've got enough on your plate already. And we will back you up again if you get some heat because of that from the person who's asking. We will stand there with you and say, no, they're not doing this. So I think that's important. We're in a very fortunate position at the school that our teachers have a 60% teaching load across the week, which is pretty good. Maximum teaching load of 16 out of 25 lessons. So they have a lot of sort of preparation time, and so they can give that support throughout the course of the day. But it would be unhealthy if teachers were working late into the evening supporting students and those sorts of things. Everybody needs a break.
I was just doing the math on that. Well, that's as a percentage, like 64% teaching load, isn't it? 16 out of 25.
Yeah.
That's, I suppose that in itself is to be able to have that as a commodity, because it really is, because that obviously for you as a principal who's looking after a budget of a school, that comes at a cost, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Being able to reduce teacher workload like that, and not every school can. So,
Yeah.
kudos to you for being able to do that and recognize that.
Well,
and I suppose
yeah, look, that was in place before I came. I suppose that's something that the board of our school committed to, and the founding principle. And I think it's something really special and important, because well-being is a massively important issue in schools.
yeah. Do you find then that the local schools and the schools around you, do they try to have a very similar approach to it in terms of reducing the workload? I mean, it may not be exactly like yours, but do the teachers have a quota per se that they fill, or they give an extra time to do their admin work?
And I'm not going to comment on what government schools do, because I don't really know.
Okay.
I know that within Singapore, there are a lot of international schools, and there are some tremendous ones here. I mean, really outstanding education, amazing opportunities that are being offered to students, teachers who are just at the top of their game, top of their profession, and working really, really hard. And I think that when you're looking to recruit top talent, I think it's important that you do consider what you're offering as a school in terms of well-being packages or opportunities going forward, understanding that you can be flexible with certain things, understanding people's situations. So when there's a crisis at home, looking to see how you can release the person to do that and cover it without impacting the people who are left home. So I think that schools in Singapore, despite the pressure of, having to get enrollments, having to keep the budgets tight, I think the long game is important. And if you look after your staff, in the long term, your problems will be less than if you don't look after your staff and you've got constant turnover, you've got retention problems, and you're firefighting all of the time. And you can't focus on the big picture and the important things that actually make the difference in the classroom.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity then, obviously within the Middle East, we have some sort of, let's say, local schools to some extent. And there is the oddest occasion you will find an expat teacher who is working in local schools and working with local students. Do you find that's the case also in Singapore? Could you have an expat teacher like myself from UK who comes and works in a government school?
It does happen for sure. I've seen expatriate teachers working in MOE schools. I don't know the guidance on that. And I don't know their visa status. They might be permanent residents. They may have renounced their original nationality and become Singapore citizens. I don't really know the rules around that, so I don't want to speak out of turn. But I would say that in international schools, there is a quota of visas which you get given. And through that visa process, that will set your diversity of staff nationalities to a large degree.
Yeah, because my follow-up was out of curiosity because we've mentioned how good the Singaporean education system is and the training they give to educators.
Yeah.
I was curious then in terms of it, whether, from an international school's perspective, whether you need to or whether you want to fulfill then, getting Singaporean teachers into your school. Like for you, who is a 50-50, do you have to have so many teachers there? Or is it actually more beneficial for you to have Singaporean teachers?
Yeah. We want Singaporean teachers. Yeah, they bring so much to our school. We're probably 60% of our teachers are Singaporean and 40% are expatriate. And our expatriate teachers come from all over the world. It's not just like British teachers or Australian teachers. We get teachers from everywhere. And that is a big strength of our school. And our Singaporean teachers make a tremendous contribution. They are incredibly smart and bright and have a real aspirational intent for our students and also for their nation as well. It's a privilege to be able to work alongside them. But then also bringing expatriate teachers in and giving them a sense of what our school is about and what it's not about is really important as well. So we've got to be clear about what our school is so that when we've got teachers coming in from what can be vastly different systems, an MOE system versus somebody who's coming in from working in inner city Birmingham or Manchester, something like that. We really have to do a lot of sort of cultural induction about what our school is about. So that's important.
Amazing. So I want to kind of you to imagine now that you're going to give me a sales pitch. So obviously we're talking about global perspectives in education, and obviously, reputations that different countries have for that. If you were selling sort of the Singaporean education system, if you were talking to, other principals globally around the world, and they were like, hey, what should we be? And you were like, you know what, this is what you want to be taking. This is what I'm selling you. These are the USPs. What do you think are the top strategies or the top approaches that, as a country that Singapore is offering that you think, what, the rest of the world need to know about this. The rest of the world would benefit from this.
Sure, absolutely. I think that the whole nation has a culture of aspiration. It's a nation which is tiny on the world stage. It's known as the little red dot because on the map, it's bigger than the country. And so I think that there's something in the psyche of the country that wants to punch above its weight and be a global player on the global stage. And it has achieved that. And so I think there's a healthy pride about that. And so when you come here as a guest in the country, and I've been fortunate enough to be hosted by this country for 8 years, see that aspirational intent in its people, experiencing that through its parents, and then being able to partner with them in the growth of their children is something which I will never forget. Whenever my time is up in Singapore, that's one of the things which I will cherish the most. And for anybody considering coming to Singapore, that would be part of it. And I think that the second part of that is the aspirational intent of the teachers who come here. You have to come here with the mindset that we are teaching people to act on a global stage, to be global leaders, to be involved in something that's going to be big, whether that's through entrepreneurship or a family business or in the government or the private sector, whatever it might be. Come with that mindset, a big mindset, an open mindset, a global mindset. If you've got that and you come to Singapore, you're going to land very well.
Amazing. So just to finish with more of a light-hearted one. And we're not going to say you've got any intention to leave Singapore anytime soon. Sounds from that you've done a good sales pitch for everyone listening and watching about probably, not that Singapore really I think ever struggles to get international teachers in, but as and when your time does, whenever that may be, if you could take one element of Singapore's education system to another country, if you could bring it with you, and you've already mentioned the parents, so I'm not going to let you use that one.
Sure.
What would it be and why?
I've used this word a few times, I think, but aspiration. Being able to take a student who is hopeful for their future, who sees a bright world ahead of them, who sees the opportunities that exist for their contribution, and understanding that investing in their development now when they're teenagers, and being serious about setting themselves up for the future, is something which I think really carries people forwards, and the young people here have. And I think that goes a long way to them being able to be successful. So walking around the place, seeing students studying in Starbucks or Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf, or on the side of the street, or finding a void deck where they can study, seeing all of that, you just see people who are building their futures and looking to build a future will impact the world. I think if all students had that mindset, our world would be in a much better place.
You're correct. And it's kind of boring to, this is the next one. Maybe we don't have an answer for that. But how do we go about achieving that? Like you're there, you're living and breathing it. Like I'm here and I'm thinking, right, how can I make, I've got this new sixth form center. How can I bring in aspiration? I'm all about developing character and culture. And there might be lots of people out there also listening. Like, what's the secret sauce? How are you doing it? Like, what do we need to know?
Well, I'm not going to claim that I know the secret sauce or I'm that I'm some expert on this topic, but I think that leaders in school and teachers in school, I think that they need to bring part of that mindset to their classrooms. They need to bring part of that to what the purpose and culture of the school is, so that students are immersed in it, and that you can constantly bring people back to guiding statements, learner profiles, that you give them experiences and opportunities, and they don't need to be expensive trips overseas. They can be things that happen in your school where you allow people the opportunity to have their voice heard, challenge their thinking, to push back on them, and make that just part of the normal conversation, and be speak positivity into their lives, that the world is open to them. They can do whatever they want, and with people's help, rather than pushing teachers away and it's all being about me, bring people in to help you achieve your goals. I think that's maybe part of the secret sauce, one ingredient. Other people, I'm sure, would contribute other ingredients that would make that sauce pretty special.
And that's exactly what we want. We want other people to come and contribute their little ingredients so that we can all, as global educators, value from that. And I think that's a wonderful way to end this conversation. And thank you ever so much, Gavin, for coming on and sharing and talking to us about ACS and Singapore and your journey and sharing some of that knowledge. It's been a wonderful conversation today with you, and really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Alex. I appreciate everything you do. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to share with you and your listeners.